Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Couch GMs podcast. It is Friday, September 9th, 2022, and I'm your host, George Kerth, joined by the one and only Cody Roadcap. Cody, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about that game last night? That was a wild one.
Yeah, I mean,
Explosive,
potential
high
Game of the Year candidate
scoring,
in Game 1.
game of the Super Bowl rematch. Man, that was a great way to kick off the NFL season.
I mean, I knew the schedule makers got it right, but you just had to wait and see. We're recording this on Thursday night before the Thursday night game. Let's start with that.
Yeah,
um,
so if it's a slugfest for some reason, or both teams treat it like the fourth preseason game, we tried to bring the energy because we're gonna watch the game as soon as we're done recording. But we have not actually seen it. But that'll probably be a running joke because we record on Thursday all season.
Yeah, exactly. So if you weren't with us last year when we also did it, we're going to do it again this year. Also, Tyler will not be with us today. He's out there fishing for fantasy points in the Atlantic Ocean or something. I don't know. We'll see him next week. He will be back. But today on the show, we're going to hit some NFL news and notes. We're going to bring back my favorite segment, Quotes of the Week, and we are going to preview every week one game besides the Thursday night game and tell you some of the best fantasy plays, some guys you should avoid, some guys you should be watching in case you want waiver wire material next week. We'll keep you up to date on everything you need to know week one. Make sure you find us on thecouchgms.com and our social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at the Couch GMs, and our Discord chat where we will be talking throughout all the week one games. Make sure you hit the link in the description, join that chat with us about all the games. Cody, let's jump into NFL news. Leading off NFL news, we have Rams news, but it has nothing to do with the game that actually happened. The Rams signed their head coach Sean McVay and general manager Les Snead to contract extensions, keeping them with the team through 2026. This isn't necessarily new news. We heard a lot coming out about this. I want to say it was a few weeks ago or a couple months ago. It could have even been, but it's now official as of the Rams PR team. So, I mean, I think it's a great move. It's basically a reward for them to getting that team to the Super Bowl victory last year.
For sure, yeah, I won't spend too much time on it. I think Sean McVay was announced a little bit ago, but they tied it all together with Les Snead on Thursday. They got Aaron Donald to come back to football. I mean, he sent a full-on letter saying he was retiring to the Rams this offseason. So they got him to come back to football. They put another strong team around Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, brought in Allen Robinson. Don't care about draft picks. We'll see how long that plays off, but great for the Rams organization.
Yeah, I feel like they haven't had a top draft pick in about 700 years at this point. So we'll see how that goes in the future. You're right. But moving on to some injury news, Jets quarterback Zach Wilson, who we heard may have a chance to play week one, he now has drastically changed and is out until at least week four with his knee injury. So that's Joe Flacco for the first 3 weeks of the season. I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more when we get to the Jets Ravens game later, but does this affect your outlook on any of the Jets' weapons to start the season?
Nope. I think I'm pretty confident with the ones I'd be willing to play, and that would be Brees Hall, Michael Carter, whichever one you're more comfortable with. I'm a Brees Hall guy. I think George, you're a Michael Carter guy. That just goes to show on where how 50-50 it is. And then in terms of wide receiver, the only one I'm really excited about, or I'll use excited lightly as like a flexible options, maybe some daily fantasy and some good matchups, is Elijah Moore. I
Mm-hmm.
think he'll be their number one target this year. Still too early for Garrett Wilson for me. Um, but my interesting thing is like, why not just put him on IR and give him the 4 weeks? Like, why waste the roster spot? Why continue this drawn out process? So we'll see if they make that move before Sunday's game, so they can get him back in 4 weeks. But I guess if not, we'll see him in week 4.
Yeah, that's the plan, and we'll have to see what changes. We'll talk more Jets in a bit. And then there's a contract extension. I mean, there's a couple contract extensions, but the big one for fantasy news, tight end Dawson Knox and the Buffalo Bills agreed to a 4-year, $53.6 million extension that keeps him with the team through 2026. Now, I know it was kind of quiet that OJ Howard ended up being there in the offseason, and we're like, maybe they're just kind of testing the waters with some other tight ends, but he got released. Knox has won the job again. He's the guy, and it seems like they're just putting all the chips in that he's their guy.
Yeah, and you can't overlook the fact that he's best friends with Josh Allen. I know that sounds like an odd thing to say when a guy gets paid, which congrats to Dawson Knox. He definitely earned it. But when you're best friends with a quarterback, you're a safety blanket. You've been on his fantasy team. Like Dawson Knox has been a guy that we've asked the question, was last year a fluke or is that the
Mhm.
new consistency? And the way the Bills anteed up and paid him this year, it seems like they expect big things out of him. And maybe we should be tempering some Gabriel Davis expectations and thinking not all those targets will be that left with Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders, which Emmanuel Sanders, congrats on his retirement. By the way, that's he's going to be a Bronco. I thought he would retire a Steeler, but it definitely makes sense why he's going to do it as the Broncos since he won the Super Bowl with them. But back to Dawson Knox, just a guy that he might be a bigger part and maybe a later round steal than what we originally thought heading into the season.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of it still is going to come down to touchdown dependency when it comes to him, and he
Like
had
most
a
tight ends.
ridiculous, like most tight ends, except for maybe your top three. But really, that he had such a ridiculous touchdown season last year. He could score a ton of touchdowns and still have a regression. So we're not out here saying like, oh, because of this, like they're showing he should be a top 5 tight end. Like he still probably could end up being a borderline tight end a lot of weeks. He was right near the tail end of those guys that we were like, these are the guys that you could probably start every week, and then you're going into the dartboard. And he probably doesn't move the needle on anything like this, but I
No,
still think it's a good, sign of confidence in him.
no, I think that's a great way to wrap that up. Is at the end of the day, this is a good sign for the Bills and what he means to the organization, what he means to them, his relationship with the players, front office. But at the end of the day, in fantasy, his usage might still be the same. And
Mhm.
right is at that borderline, is he a streamable tight end or a every week starter? I think that's where Dawson Knox will still finish by the end of the season. But that's it because we're back to 2 episodes a week. That's the news and notes. So before we hit the games, why don't we jump into quotes of the week?
Before we jump into the next segment, I have to tell you that support for the Couch GMs podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below the waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped recently launched the ultimate men's hygiene bundle, the Performance Package. Join over 5 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with the exclusive offer to you, 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code CouchGMs. That's COUCHGMS at manscaped.com. Manscaped did send each of us a Performance Package 4.0 to try out, and all I can say is wow. I had high expectations coming in, and they still blew them away. I've been trying many things to stay cleaned up down there, but this is by far the easiest, smoothest, and most pain-free. It is really a game changer. Each performance package comes with a Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold all your goodies. The star of the show, of course, the Lawnmower 4.0. This trimmer has completely changed my grooming routine. It has cut my grooming time in half, and all while reducing irritation, nicks, snags, and tugs thanks to Manscaped's advanced skin-safe technology. And if that isn't enough to make you want one, the Lawnmower 4.0 is also waterproof, so no more mess on the bathroom floor. The performance package also includes the Weed Whacker, an ear and nose hair trimmer that also includes Manscaped's proprietary skin safe technology for a smooth and comfortable trim. The Crop Preserver below the waist deodorant and Crop Reviver below the waist toner are two products that I didn't even know I needed, but now I can't live without after seeing how they reduce irritation after trimming and chafing from everyday activity. And they even throw in 2 free gifts, Manscaped's boxers and the shed, the travel bag to carry all of your goodies anywhere you go. It's time to take care of yourself, so go to manscaped.com and get 20% off and free shipping with the code CouchGMs. Again, that's COUCHGMS. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use the code CouchGMs. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. Now back to the show. Quotes of the week. Welcome back, by the way, to Quotes of the Week. I have to start it off with a couple of quotes about Ravens running back J.K. Dobbins because I feel like news has been all over the place with him. It's really, you're trying to search for what's real, what's not. And if you're talking about 3 people in the Ravens organization, it's still all over the place. So I'm going to start off with head coach John Harbaugh, who said J.K. is really ascending quickly. And then he continued to say he was non-committal about who will be active week 1. Later in a press conference, quarterback Lamar Jackson said hopefully he will be out there in a couple of weeks. So that makes you sound like he's not going to play week 1, but could be out there soon. And then offensive coordinator Greg Roman had said that every running back is going to have a role, and a lot of times he's going to go with a hot hand approach. So even when JK's back, is he going to be the bell cow? How long is it going to be until he is? Like, we obviously are just guessing, but what are your thoughts after hearing everything and seeing everything through the Twitter feed, Cody?
All right, I'll go through the quotes one by one quick.
Okay.
John Harbaugh, just because he just called him JK, feels like he was just saying, just kidding, like you won't be ready for week 1. Maybe
I
I'm
put that in parentheses because he never actually did just say JK. That was just me in there to give
okay.
it context. He never
Gotcha.
did just say JK.
Okay, sounds good. So scratch that strike
Yeah.
from the records. That's an interesting one. Lamar Jackson, I feel like, is the most realistic. Like, he'll
Mhm.
be out there in a couple weeks, um, or maybe he'll be out there fully ready to go in a couple weeks. We saw the video surface about a week ago, and it's made its rounds around Twitter again this week of him doing a drill, walking away limping, still not 100% on that knee. Greg Roman, though, with every running back is going to have a role. They did bring in Kenyon Drake, who's a guy I've been talking about a little bit. They still brought in Mike Davis, who was a guy that, we had high hopes for last year after his big year in Carolina. Still have Justice Hill as a pass catching option. And then you, of course, have J.K. Dobbins. So realistically, like, I don't think it's crazy to think that every running back on the team is going to have a role. But the going with the hot hand definitely makes me even more concerned for J.K. when he is back and healthy, um, to the point where I'm completely out on J.K. Dobbins. Thankfully, I don't have him in too many leagues, or if I did, I immediately drafted a backup because I wasn't fully convinced that he'd be ready. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know what his trade value is after these videos and all these quotes and stuff like that, but he might be a guy that like is my early season, like trying to trade, trying to let someone else buy in on the hype that he's going to be back in a few weeks, get some value out of him while he still can.
Yeah, I think it definitely is the safe way. If you can get similar value to where you drafted him, try to make a move now, and basically then you're making a lateral move. But I don't really have this hasn't moved the needle too much for me because when I got shares of J.K. Dobbins, I didn't expect him to be solid in the first part of the year. Like, you still expected him to come back with how everything was going. You obviously, if you drafted early, you didn't even think he was going to be active for the first 4 games. Um, and now he's technically trending ahead of that. But really, if you look back to 2 years ago when he did play a full season, he was also still a committee back with Gus Edwards. And he got to the point near the end of the season where he was talented enough that he was taking more carries from Edwards every single week because they realized that that was their best chance to win. Last year, the Ravens had a ton of former superstar running backs. And yeah, they were using the committee approach. And it still got to the point where I think it was Devontae Freeman was talented enough that he had a stretch of like 5 games in the late regular season, early fantasy playoffs that he was fantasy relevant because they realized that was their best chance to win and he was getting the bulk of the carries. Then eventually Latavius Murray started to get hot and they did switch it over. So there's always the chance that you're going to get in a situation where JK comes back, is pretty healthy, has a good run, and then starts to get eaten away from later. But I think if there's anybody in that backfield on a run heavy team that you want a hold of, it's still J.K. Dobbins. It just won't give you dividends for the first few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna follow that up with one quick question, and also Gus Edwards is, still is on PUP, so he'll be in that mix, potentially
Yep.
around the same time we think J.K. Dobbins will be back, just to make that even a little bit more messy. But you said you went into it, not expecting him to play week 1, week 2. But what is your like line in the sand for like, okay, admitting that this was not, he's not back to what I expected him to be? Is it week 6, week 8? I mean, week 10? Like, what time do you hit the panic button on J.K. Dobbins?
If I had to just throw a random number on it, I think week 6 is probably a good idea, but I think a lot of it has to do with how many games he plays in the early part of the season. If you find out he's active week 1, gets a couple of carries because they're just trying to work him in, and then doesn't look great, like you're starting to maybe push that timeline forward. If you start seeing a progression then in week 2, week 3 where he starts to get, his yards per carry go up, his usage starts to go up a little bit, then maybe you push that timeline back a little bit. But if you had to just have me throw a random number on it today, week 6, you probably have a good idea of where he's going to be at week 6. That'd be 2 weeks after they initially expected him to play. He will probably have 3, 4, 5 games under his belt at that point. And you'll have a good sample size to be able to look at it and say, he looks right or he doesn't look right.
Alrighty, so we'll have to revisit this conversation in week 6. We have a few more quotes for you that we'll get through a little bit quicker. Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas, he was asked if the 2019 Thomas was still in there after he hasn't played the last 2 seasons, and he quoted himself, or he was quoted saying, "I'm trying to top that. I'm trying to top it for sure." Um, I mean, if he can come back and be 2019 Michael Thomas, that's huge. But I look at that more as one of those quotes that, like, what else is he supposed to say? Like, no, I'm not that guy
Fair.
anymore, but I'm still gonna be productive. Like, I feel like he has to say that kind of thing. So I'm not like thinking, oh man, Michael Thomas is back or anything. Like, I still have to see it to believe it. So that quote, his optimism doesn't change anything for me on Michael Thomas.
I'm right there with you. I think he was being undervalued in some leagues, like especially like platforms like NFL.com, where he was going undrafted in a lot of things. That's ridiculous. I think that kind of did correct itself in the last few weeks a little bit, but that something like that, like it's good to see he still has a competitive fire, but it doesn't actually change anything. And I don't really think 2019 Michael Thomas is still there. He could still be very solid, but that was a record-breaking season for a wide receiver. So we'll have to see what goes on there. Commanders running back Brian Robinson was reported this week to be off his crutches. His knee swelling is going down. He actually has a chance to come back after his 4 weeks on injured reserve. But in the meantime, it's Antonio Gibson's backfield, at least seemingly. And Commanders coach Ron Rivera was, when asked about his usage of Gibson, he said, "I trust him. We're going to give him the football. I have no issue with that." So Ron Rivera seems not concerned with the preseason struggles of Antonio Gibson, but at the same time, that could be another situation of he needed to say that.
Yeah, I think there's, a little bit of like he's protecting his guy. But I think we also have to look and see what we saw last year. Like Antonio Gibson has talent, like let's not overlook that, but he just hasn't been consistent. He's had his up and down. So have a couple good weeks. So have a couple bad weeks. Like he'll probably finish, as a top 24 running back this season. But it'll be like how Ezekiel Elliott last year finished, I believe, as running back 6 in half point PPR scoring. But that was due to injuries and because he was healthy the whole season. But if
Mhm.
you looked at his points per game, it was all the way down at 16. I think we might see a little bit of the same thing with Antonio Gibson. He'll play a lot, he'll get a lot of usage, but on a week to week basis, it'll be a hard guy to really evaluate.
Yeah, and now especially seeing that some people could have gotten him into mid to late rounds, depending on when you had your draft, when the whole Brian Robinson hype was happening, you might take that 16th in average points per game running back to kind of, player, at least for the beginning part of the season. Maybe he's somebody you have with J.K. Dobbins and you could throw in there the first few weeks. We don't really know. But
Man, if
I,
that's your running backs, I feel so bad for you.
No, I mean, I'm just saying if you have J.K. Dobbins happen to be a running back too, because you went zero running back, and then late in the draft you added Antonio Gibson, I mean, it's not pretty. But those two with their timelines could mesh together pretty well.
If you say
Cody's
so,
going to
man.
look something up here. I don't know
No,
what
I
he's
'cause I just don't recall Antonio Gibson being that late of a draft pick.
during
That's
during that little stretch where it was like a week and a half, where we thought that Brian Robinson had won the job and Antonio Gibson was playing with the special teams. There were drafts that Gibson was falling into round 8.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I guess I just don't remember it because I was, seeing RB25, and the different
They
scoring
bumped him a
formats.
lot after the Brian Robinson situation. So like it was a stretch in there where we thought he wasn't going to be a starter and he was falling in some drafts lower than Brian Robinson. But if you were before or after that stretch, yeah, you're most likely had to get him in like round 5, round 4, maybe round 6 if you're lucky.
Gotcha. So if you were
Yeah.
in that sweet spot, is what you're saying, that
Yes.
I just was not remembering. I get what you're saying now. We're on the
Yeah.
same page. We got one more quote. I believe we have one more quote. It's
Yes,
from
one more quote.
Cowboys linebacker Michael Parsons, potential defensive player of the year. He was on talking about Tom Brady as they have the big Sunday night matchup against the Buccaneers this week. He said, "You just see his competitive nature. He has that fire inside of him. He looks to kill you. He wants to step on your throat like you a roach. That's what you look for in competitors. That's why, if you're a real competitor, you look up to Tom Brady. You look up to Kobe Bryant with that Mamba mentality. You look up to Michael Jordan. I wouldn't ask you to do anything I wouldn't do." I mean, Micah Parsons calling Brady a roach or calling
No,
himself a roach that he's going to
he's
get
calling
stepped on
him
his throat.
a pest control guy. He wants to step on you like a roach. I don't know.
No, but I mean, honestly, you don't win that many championships without a certain mentality. I mean, we could argue for days, is Tom Brady like the greatest quarterback of all time? And, I'll say no, he's not. He's the most accomplished, but he's not the best actual quarterback. Um, but you don't get that accomplished without a special mentality. Putting him up there with, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, it takes a special kind of person. So I don't think there's any, uh, lies about what Michael Parsons saying. It was just the way that he got his point across that we found so funny and had to include it.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And we couldn't find any good food quotes this week, so that was the best we got, but I think it was still solid. But that's a nice little welcome back to quotes of the week. But we have football to talk about. Why don't we look at week 1? So I hope you guys got a good start to your week from the Thursday night games if you had anybody in Bills Rams. But why don't we get yourself a week 1 lineup to win the rest of the week? And we'll start off with the week with the 1 o'clock games. The New Orleans Saints are traveling to the Atlanta Falcons. We had a weird discussion, I think, on our last episode about quarterbacks. One of the people that I said that I would start over Matt Stafford this week is Jameis Winston. I know if you drafted Matt Stafford as your QB1, you probably rolled with him. I hope it worked out for you. But is there any other situation, unless it's like a 2 quarterback league or maybe a 14-teamer, that you would see starting Jameis Winston this week?
I mean, I think that's a great question, and honestly, we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday's show.
Mhm.
Normally on week to week, so, we'll go through starters and who we'd rather sit. But on this week's episode, because you just finished your draft, you should, in most part, have your guys in order. So if you didn't draft Jameis Winston, you're probably not going to pick him up to play him,
Mhm.
unless you drafted somebody that you didn't like, or maybe you just rolled with Kenny Pickett in case he named the starter and you needed a guy. Then Jameis Winston would be, a solid start here. I do like Jameis Winston if you need him, if you're in a deep league. Maybe he's a little bit cheaper in daily fantasy if you're into that kind of thing. But I think a lot of our conversation today will be about like those flexible guys, or if you're 2 flex leagues, or right there on the border, if you took a running back and a wide receiver, some of the guys we like more and more. But for the Saints, I think we talked about it a little bit with Michael Thomas. They have Michael Thomas. He's been limited with a hamstring. You still have Jarvis Landry, who is kind of forgotten about that he's still there. And then you have the rookie Chris Olave. Is it too early to play him in your flex, or any of those guys in flex consideration for you? And if you had to pick a Saints wide receiver, which one would it be?
I feel like the answer should be Michael Thomas, and that's what my gut's telling me. But I have this weird feeling that Jarvis Landry is going to have a great game too. So I think you're probably better off waiting the week, playing somebody else who you drafted higher in that flex spot in week 1, unless you have Michael Thomas. Like, I would not start Olave or Landry yet, but this is going to be a really good benchmark game. It should be a solid offensive game for the Saints and a good matchup to see how those wide receivers are going to shake out.
Awesome. And then heading over to the Falcons side, the big injury, it's not really an injury, he's just limited, is rookie wide receiver Drake London. But on the Falcons side, you're playing Kyle Pitts. He's in your lineup every week. You're not touching the quarterbacks until something drastic happens.
Yes.
Um, with Drake London's injury, you probably took him in a potential flexible spot, but this is where you're going to be looking for someone else. Like, you want to see him prove it. You took the upside. Go with a solid guy like if you have Adam Thielen or something like that, who went a little around the same area, even a little bit later. Uh, go a little bit safer. Um, and then I was going to say one more thing, but it completely.
Is it Cordarrelle
So George,
Patterson?
yes, thank you for helping me out there. Cordarrelle Patterson. He was a guy he was going around 7, round 8. So depending on what your draft strategy was, how deep you are, you might need to play him. And this is like a perfect example of the guy we're talking about, round 7, round 8. Right there, that borderline. If you're in a 2 flex league, you might have to play him. If you're in 1 flex, you probably drafted the guy right before him, and Cordarrelle Patterson, who you're going to go back and forth with. Is Cordarrelle Patterson in your lineup this week? I mean, the Saints defense was pretty good last year overall, and especially against running backs.
Yeah, and I wish we could kind of tell how they were against pass catching running backs because I'm still expecting Cordarrelle Patterson to mostly just be involved as a pass catching role. And I like the game script for him because I do not expect Atlanta to have a lead in this game. It's divisional, anything could happen, but I'm expecting the Falcons to be playing from behind, which is why I do have a little bit of faith that Cordarrelle Patterson could be a flexible option this week. But on top of it, I think the more important thing that I'm watching is how do the running back carries shake out? And that could be something that affects the waiver wire next week. Maybe if you're going to use that strategy we were talking about earlier in the week with picking up a guy who might be a dart throw, Damian Williams might not be a bad guy to add in case he ends up leading running back carries. Tyler, I did find out it's Algier. So I'm sorry, Cody. But we did say it like 7 different ways, so I don't really know if that was right or not the way you said it. Is probably drafted as someone that you can keep. I would not start, but keep an eye on your roster and see how he performs week 1. Um, but to go back to your question, yeah, I think Patterson is a flexible option if you drafted him as a flex, but I would not force him into your lineup if you have somebody you drafted higher.
Awesome. All right, I think that's enough talk for that game. We got a lot more to move on to, so let's move on to. We're going to stay with the NFC South with the new quarterback in the Carolina Panthers as they host the Cleveland Browns. Big injury news, kind of. McCaffrey has found his way onto the injury report. He was a full participant on Thursday with a shin injury, so no concern just yet if you are a McCaffrey owner. Um, We're not expecting any quarterbacks from this to be startable, whether it's Jacoby Brissett or Baker Mayfield. Not in love with any of those guys. DJ Moore, he's in your lineup. And then on the Brown side, you're probably playing Amari Cooper based on where you're dropping him, but I don't know how much you like that. But my big question is, a guy, and if we're playing the tight end dartboard with the Cleveland Browns, and you completely punted on the position. So you took your tight end when you're taking your kickers and defense. One of the guys
Mhm.
down there was David Njoku, a guy that they signed this offseason after he requested a trade and they got him back. Any thoughts on playing him against Carolina?
I think the Carolina doesn't scare me defensively enough to go away from David Njoku. And maybe I'll play the role of Tyler here in hot takes. I'm almost more comfortable playing David Njoku, maybe because the tight end position has less hype around it too, than Amari Cooper. So yeah, I mean, I'm cool with throwing that dart
Wow.
out there. I mean, don't go out there and go over one of those top 8, top 9 tight ends. But if you punted the position and you have just David Njoku or somebody random down the board that is not impressive, yeah, I don't hate that pick.
All right. So maybe a sneaky start there with um, David Njoku, but just a reminder that they do have a decent defense. It's not the best, but with Shaq Thompson in the middle covering some tight ends, it could be limited. And it is still Jacoby Brissett. So a guy that you're comfortable with, but there might be some better options out there, and you might even need to pick up a tight end like David Njoku if you have the starting tight end for the San Francisco 49ers with our next matchup as the San Francisco 49ers head to the Chicago Bears. And that is right, George Kittle is gone his second day without practicing. It doesn't sound like he's going to play. George, what's your concern level if George Kittle doesn't play?
I mean, I think we drafted George Kittle knowing that these were going to be stretches in the year where that happens. I think we didn't expect it to happen week 1 for sure, but Kittle hasn't played a full season in the last, I want to say 3. But when he plays, he's solid. So Now you're going to, go into damage control. You're going to see who's out there on free agency. David Njoku's not an awful play, or I'm sure we'll hit out some other guys as we go down here. But it kind of just comes with the territory with George Kittle. This isn't something that's like completely out there and we haven't seen in the past.
All right. So my question for you is, and I'll start the conversation. Do you
Okay.
like a guy like David Njoku, or a guy that we heard a little bit from last year, and Tyler Kroft, who they brought in this year as the backup, uh, against the Bears, who not the best team, just being the straight George Kittle replacement? Or do you think there's some other guys out there, maybe even Adam Troutman from the game we talked about earlier? Um, are you going different way, or are you just going to go with the backup tight end in San Francisco?
I would probably go a different way.
I'm
I
with
mean,
you.
Croft could have a great game, but there's other weapons in San Francisco that are more likely to get a bump as opposed to them just inserting Croft like Kittle and saying go.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I would look on the waiver wire if
Mhm.
George Kittle doesn't go. And then, which is a reminder, make sure you're following the Couch GMs on Twitter because we'll tweet out inactives to help you get your lineups right and set for week one. We'll probably also be chatting about those on the Discord. So, another good reminder for that. But with the George Kittle news, does that concern you at all about where you evaluated Trey Lance? And or Debo Samuel. Like obviously you're playing Debo Samuel, but are you expecting, maybe a little bit less points because there'll be more focus on him?
Um, yeah, potentially. I don't think it's going to be a significant enough bump because they're going to find ways to get Debo Samuel involved. He's going to be playing out of the backfield sometimes. They're going to find ways to get him open. I'm not super worried about it when it comes to his standpoint. Trey Lance, he's going to get some points with his legs too. Um, I think he'll be fine also. As much as I'm not a big fan of Trey Lance, like it'll be okay. I think Brandon Ayuk would have to be the one to really step up though if this offense is going to just jump in without Kittle and run with it, it would be Ayuk. I expect to have a big week. Not saying start him. You got to sit and wait with him, but somebody to watch, maybe potential waiver wire guy next week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised you're bringing up Brandon Ayuk, but I like it. And
I'm
it,
gonna hate myself for it next week. Don't worry.
and I do like that they get to play the Chicago Bears, a team we're not expecting to be very good.
Mhm.
With that said, David Montgomery, he's probably in your lineup. You probably draft him too high not to play him.
Yep.
Uh, Cole Kmet, I think he's a solid play. George
He's
is
probably
completely
somebody
out.
that you could find on the waiver wire too. That would be a good fill in for a Kittle. He
Yeah, I mean,
wasn't
I think
drafted
he
in a
was
ton of
actually getting
leagues.
drafted in most leagues, so as like a late end flyer. Um, but I do think
Depends on how deep your league is.
if he's still available, you should just go pick up Cole Kmet. He's going to lead their team
Mhm.
in targets.
Yeah.
Um, and then Darnell Mooney, he's on your bench for me. The 49ers defense is too good. I have to see it with Justin Fields. George is like, give me a weird look, like he might
I
prefer
was gonna
Darnell Mooney
ask
over
you,
Cole
but
Kmet.
I was gonna ask you, but I know I'm low on Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper or Darnell Mooney.
Oh, I'd play Amari Cooper.
Okay. All right.
That's it. That's where I would go with that one. Um, Darnell Mooney just, I think he has potential. Like, I'm actually pretty sure I'm starting him in our dynasty league this week now, and for I'm in like rebuild mode, so like all my wide receivers young. So like I'm starting Elijah Moore, I'm starting Darnell Mooney. Like it was a expansion team rebuild, so I have a lot of young pieces, not a lot of solid guys. And if you're completely out, you can roll with Darnell Mooney, hoping for that one big touchdown or, getting possibly 10 targets. Like he has that upside. But for me, week one against a good defense, that's why I'm out.
That makes sense. And we'll have to see how that goes. If he does have a good week, maybe he starts creeping into every week flex potential category. A lot of receivers to talk about on this next team, though, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are traveling to their division rival in the Cincinnati Bengals. Um, so Deontay Johnson, probably not only the safest option on that team, but someone you probably drafted high enough you're gonna play him. Um, Chase Claypool, George Pickens. Any
Nope.
thoughts on a flex? No? Okay. That's what I was going to go to. Najee Harris in your lineup. Then we can go over to the Bengals side, I guess, where you're definitely starting Higgins, Chase. Any thoughts on a Tyler Boyd?
Not in week one. Real quick, I do want to go back. Just a reminder: Deontay Johnson is been a limited participant in practice, with the shoulder, and then he had cramps as well on Thursday. So, expected to play, but he was limited. So make sure you have a close eye on that one. On the Bengals side, they have like 4 tight ends and a wide receiver on injury reserve, or not injury reserve, but on the injury report. But they're all guys you don't know. So the big guys that you drafted, they should be okay. Um, but I will ask you, we're expecting a lot out of this. It's going to be a big game. These games are always hard fought. Hayden Hurst, if you need a guy to replace George Kittle. That's gonna be the question of the each matchup. I feel like it's gonna be, do you like Hayden Hurst to replace George Kittle? Um, and
I
if I
feel
have to
like
tie that in,
we're gonna like
Hayden
just
Hurst or
make a running list. Make a running list on the side of the edit, and we're just gonna start inserting tight ends onto the list as we go. So I would put Hayden Hurst below David Njoku.
okay,
And still Cole Kmet at the top if he's available. So
awesome. I like that. Joey B, you drafted him to play a quarterback, so he's in there. Um, and I think that's it for that matchup. So George, why don't you kick us off with your second favorite team and where they're going and who we should play?
I think I did some adjusting here. You can see more Eagles gear in my background now. So they're my favorite team. Thank you, Cody. Um, Eagles traveling to the Detroit Lions. Miles Sanders is a full participant in practice. He's going to be a full go this week. I know that he's kind of a sketchy running back, but depending on what platform you drafted on, you probably drafted him to at least be your flex or maybe your running back too. He'd probably be in your lineup. Detroit shouldn't be too bad of a matchup for them. And we'll just kind of try to get a gauge as the game goes on and how the Eagles are going to use their running back committee because there's no chance that Miles Sanders gets every single carry. It's just not how they operate. AJ Brown's in your lineup, Jalen Hurts in your lineup. Devontae Smith is a great question. Where are you at on flexibility for Devontae Smith?
I mean, I think he's definitely flexible for sure, possibly a wide receiver too. Like you probably, I don't know if your team specifically would have drafted 2 Eagles, but you probably, there's a good chance that you could have came away from your draft with where they were going with Miles Sanders and Devontae Smith. And if I was debating my flex position, I would pick Devontae Smith.
Okay. I am still a little bit sketched out about the pass catchers behind AJ Brown in that offense just because I don't know if Jalen Hurts can support 3. And I'm still someone who thinks Dallas Goedert's going to be locked into a role. He's going to have, you know, some spots. So that's why I'm a little worried about Devontae Smith. But there's a good chance that Smith and Brown both have 1,000-yard seasons and Goddard's not far behind. So it could end up being all 3. I might feel more confident after week 1 and we see it, but that's why I was asking you about Devontae Smith in that situation. I think that covers all the Eagles. We can move over to the Lions side where it's not as clear after DeAndre Swift, who's definitely playing. Amon-Ra St. Brown was probably their first wide receiver taken. He is probably in your flex, but is there any concerns going against the Eagles' now revamped secondary?
I think I can understand the concerns with Amon-Ra St. Brown. But looking back to last year, I don't have the stats in front of me. So my apologies out there. But Warren Sharp put out something great on Twitter. I'll try to find it and maybe retweet it from the Couch GMs. But he's like on a record pace for the amount of targets he's received in his first amount of games. And I think if he gets 12 targets this game, he like breaks the record. So using last year, I know they're getting Swift back. I know they're getting TJ Hawkinson back, but what we've seen of how they used them and how well that team like started to like come to life at the end of the season, I think you have to roll Amra out there and just hope that he is going to get the targets. Yes, the Eagles are a solid secondary, so it might not be an easy day. The Lions might struggle. I know they're the hard knocks team. A lot of people are like buying into the hype that this team could be around 500. Um, and the Eagles are the team of destiny. Everyone's picking them to be the number 1 seed or win the Super Bowl or, because of all their offseason moves. But they still have to put it all together. Football's not won on paper. So I think
Mm-hmm.
Amon-Ra St. Brown should be in your lineups.
The Eagles destroyed the Lions last year, and I went to check the stats because I was curious how Amrad did. He had 3 catches for 46 yards, but that's also because TJ Hawkinson was still in the lineup. It was right before that Amrad breakout and had 10 catches for 89 yards, did TJ Hawkinson. So I have no concerns rolling out TJ Hawkinson in this case. I think the Eagles linebackers still probably could be a little susceptible to the tight end, and I still would probably roll out Amra, like you said. But I think that can pretty much wrap up that game. We can move on to the Indianapolis Colts traveling to the Houston Texans in a divisional battle. We'll start with the Texans. We did not spend a lot of time talking about the Texans last year, and now we're in an interesting situation where maybe if you drafted late, Dameon Pierce is somebody that you drafted as an actual starter in your lineup somewhere. I know in Yahoo in these last 2 weeks, he was going as early as round 3 or 4, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But if you did that, are you confident enough to start him against a tough Colts defense?
Well, you're starting him because of opportunity. Like, they don't really have much behind him now that Marlon Mack, he got cut, and then he was released from the practice squad. So I'm going to compare this to, and I'm using Snyder as an example because he's the lowest of the three of us on Najee Harris. When you watch him, you just didn't see a lot. It didn't look great, but he got so many opportunities that he still was a top fantasy option. And I think that's what people are expecting from Dameon Pierce. Um, and every year there's a late round running back that pops off. And right now, the clear answer appears to be Dameon Pierce. He hasn't done anything in the regular season. If you took him that early, absolutely you're starting him. And if you took him late and you have some availability to flex him out or not, or maybe you want to put him up there over a Miles Sanders who you took earlier, who we just talked about, who's still dealing with, he's full participant, but he did have the hamstring injury, and you want to see how that backfield shakes up. Like, I think you
Mhm.
can play Dameon Pierce on opportunities alone. Um, Again, it's not gonna be a guy. I feel like I'll put it this way: he's a guy that I'm pretty confident that he will get you at least 8 points every week. But it'll be far and few between on the weeks that he gets you more than 16 to 18. So like you have that sweet spot of him, and when you need a number two running back or a flex option, getting consistent points is sometimes an asset compared to taking like a high risk, high reward, especially in week one when there's so much unknown. So I do like playing Dameon Pierce.
Okay. I think that's a good way to put it. So even if you drafted him, okay, so I'm in this situation. I'll have you help me set my lineup. I am somebody who drafted J.K. Dobbins as a flex and also drafted Dameon Pierce later in the draft. Are you confident enough to roll Pierce in that flex, or would you go with one of my receivers, which would be Elijah Moore or Amra St. Brown?
Um, so it's really tough for me. That's right in that sweet zone between Amra St. Brown and Damian Pierce for me. And I think I would now am a wide receiver guy. Our scoring is half point PPR. So I always think your flex should be a wide receiver. That's just how I play fantasy football. I don't like playing three running backs. With that said, though, because of the opportunity, what we've seen or what we expect out of Damian Pierce, I would probably go with Pierce. But I do think there is something to how much the expectations have changed for Damian Pierce that like we could walk away from week one going either Damian Pierce was the steal of fantasy, like it's a cheat code, or like he's the biggest bust on because of how fast he rose. And if you don't want to be a part of the biggest bust, roll with Amon St. Brown. I think they're very close, but I would give the edge to Damian Pierce.
Yeah, I'm just worried that a lot of people have such high expectations on Pierce now that if he scores the 8 to 10 points like you're talking about, they're going to view it as a bust because of how high the expectations were. But really, that's what you should be expecting. Let's move on to the Colts side really quick before we move on from this game. Jonathan Taylor, you're definitely not playing him. You're playing him. Um, and Michael Pittman as well. Anybody else on that team?
No, but I will give you two names. Paris Campbell might be a guy to watch as, or maybe a late round flyer. He's a guy that might be a potential pickup. And then Nico Collins for the Houston Texans, two wide receivers just to keep your names on that could hit the waiver wires if they pop off this week. But in terms of starters, I think we hit them all.
Cool. So we can move on then to another divisional game, but in a different division. We're going to the AFC East with the Patriots facing off against the Miami Dolphins. This probably has not looked like a good matchup in the past, but here we are. Dolphins revamped team, Patriots kind of a little bit of a sleeper, but I'll start with them because we're not very confident on any of their receivers. I know I'm not confident enough to start any of them in week one, but I'm keeping an eye out to see if anybody stands out. Are you saying anything different?
Nope. I'm right there with you.
And then I think another one of the running back questions the last few weeks was Damian Harris versus Ramondre Stevenson. Any idea who to play week one? Both, neither? Do you have a favorite right now?
Yes, I have a favorite. It's Ramondre.
Okay.
Um, and I think it definitely favors him if you're in a full point PPR or half point PPR format. But I do think Damian Harris could still be like the goal line guy. He could get you some carries. So if you're more in a standard league, I think Damian Harris would have the slight edge. Um, it's a very interesting backfield, their decisions. I don't love starting either of them, but if I had to pick one, it'd be Ramondre Stevenson.
Okay. That is probably different than a lot of people drafted, so I'm glad we got that one out there. And don't completely panic on Damian Harris yet. He still has a lot of talent. He still has a good chance to steal some carries on a weekly basis. We're just looking at the dreaded running back by committee, which is also probably going to be the case in Miami. So Chase Edmonds appears to be the guy. He's going to be the number one. I'm a fan of Raheem Mostert as a flyer. Not that I'd play him week one, but even Chase Edmonds was drafted a little bit later than a lot of starting running backs. Flexible option in week one, or what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think he's flexible depending on where you got him. But I'm probably the biggest fan of the three of us on Chase Edmonds. I think he
Mm-hmm.
has potential. I think he has pass catching. He has a little bit of power to him. He has some breakaway speed. That I think he will be a very good running back in the Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel uh, zone offense or zone scheme offense. So I really like Chase Edmonds. Um, so I think he could be started. You might have some guys ahead of him that you don't have to force him in your lineup. But if you went no running back strategy and you have Chase Edmonds as RB2, like I don't think you should feel bad about it.
Good advice. And I want to add two more tight ends to the tight end discussion from this game. Hunter Henry, Mike Gesicki. Where would you put him first off?
Yikes. Um, Cole Kmet is still leading the list for me.
Okay.
Um, I
I
would
have to make a note here.
I have one on my computer right now. So currently we have it Cole Kmet, David Njoku, Hayden Hurst.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think I would go Cole Kmet, which I think we're going to differ because I think you would keep David Njoku there. Um, but I think I'd put Hunter Henry above David Njoku just because on touchdown upside.
Yep.
Mike Gesicki on who I think Mike Gesicki is he would probably be right there as like 1B. But because of
Mm-hmm.
all the weird reporting and them not like, he doesn't run block well enough to like be on the field, um, and all that weird reporting around how he looked this offseason has me a little bit concerned. But I think I'd still put him ahead of David Njoku. So I would put him right behind Cole Kmet, and then I would go Hayden Hurst, not Hayden Hurst. He was last. Hunter Henry, them double H's, and then Gasecki followed by Njoku, Hayden Hurst.
Okay. So I'm still going. I'm going to put him right below. Put Kaseki right below Njoku. So I think it's just those two that are flipped for us.
Yeah,
I
that
just
was
don't
tough.
like. What was that?
I said, yeah, that was a tough one.
Yeah, that is tough. I
Hopefully, you
just
don't need
don't
to
like
play any of them.
Kaseki because they even were like shopping him in the trade market. Like it doesn't seem like he fits the scheme they want to run with this new coach, new offense, new weapons. Even though he is a very talented tight end, it just kind of stinks that he's tough. He's stuck in a tough situation now.
For sure. But I think that wraps it up. We got two more 1 o'clock games, so let's hit those. The Baltimore Ravens, we talked a lot about with the running backs, so we'll keep that one pretty short as they go to face the New York Jets with Joe Flacco. We talked about that at the top of the show too. But with the Ravens, Mark Andrews definitely in your lineup. Lamar's definitely in your lineup. Rashad Bateman, are you playing him at all in your flex?
If you drafted him as a flex, yeah, you're probably confident enough. You most likely drafted him as like your first or second bench spot with where he was going. Wouldn't force him in your lineup.
Awesome. And then in terms of running back, let's say J.K. Dobbins doesn't go.
Hmm.
Do you like Mike Davis or Kenyon Drake?
Kenyon Drake.
Okay. We're on the same board or same
Okay.
page there. The Jets, they're still dealing with injuries along the offensive line. They brought in Dwayne Brown to replace Mekhi Becton, and he is now on the injury report with a shoulder injury. So hopefully that can, make some he can get back and playing because they've had some struggles along the offensive line. Um, we said at the top of the show, if you have Michael Carter or Brees Hall, whichever one you're confident in, I would say you can play Brees Hall. Some will say you can play Michael Carter. But just know it's going to be probably a 50-50 split to start. Think Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams from last year. They both had their weeks. They both had their down weeks. But at the end of the year, they were pretty split. That's how I see this at least how it's going to start, in my opinion. And then I told you that the guy I was liking was Elijah Moore if you needed a flex option, but you should have some other people available this season or after the draft that you don't have to force them in your lineup.
I have nothing really to differ with you there. I'm also Team Brees Hall instead of Michael Carter. I just don't see Brees Hall with his talent, being stuck behind. I don't want
Yeah.
to say stuck behind. He's going to win carries from Michael Carter as the season goes on. It's just going to be tough the first few weeks, I think. But I
Yeah.
can move us on to the last 1 o'clock. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say it always whenever I think about Brees Hall and the Michael Carter debate, I always think back to the draft, and I know we're a long way away from April when this happened, but the Jets, they had 3 first-round picks, and they tried to trade back into the first round to get Brees Hall. They were ecstatic when he fell to them. So a guy that they like that much, I just have a hard time seeing them not getting him on the field as quickly as possible.
Exactly. And then Michael Carter ends up another one of those guys who's maybe not like the athletic monster, but he's a very solid, running back in the system that now is just stuck in a bad situation. And good handcuff, not really going to be super relevant otherwise, I don't think. But we can move on to one final 1 o'clock game, the Jacksonville Jaguars traveling to the Washington Commanders. We talked about the Commanders running back situation. I think Gibson, you most likely drafted him as in your starting lineup. He should probably be in that lineup to start the season. But the Jaguars running backs are who I want to talk about because I've always been reminding you guys of James Robinson all offseason. He is now expected to play week 1. And who knows how healthy he is, how much he's going to play because he's still coming back from the Achilles injury. But does that hit at all into ETN's value?
Nope. I know
Okay.
you've been a lot higher on James Robinson than I've been. Obviously, I've been on the ETN train, and I'm going to ride or die the ETN train. Not ride or die because I'm not going to like take ETN to my grave, but I think ETN is going to be one of their top pass catching options. He's going to be their main running back, and Achilles injuries are just so hard to come back from. I know, and we're seeing players do it in record time, but we're seeing players not be themselves for a while after. Cam Akers, he came back in record time. He couldn't even average 2 yards a carry in all the work he got last year, and he's still not 100% going into. I mean, he played. Well, I assume he played last night because he wasn't ruled out prior to the game. Um,
Your argument's
but
going to be helped or hurt by what happened in a game that we didn't see yet.
correct, but I do think he will struggle a little bit to start the season, and it could be another year till he's fully back to as full strength is going to get because you can never fully recover from a torn Achilles and get back to what you were before. Same with James Robinson, a guy that was, he wasn't the most explosive to begin with. So to lose some explosiveness, um, he might steal a touchdown here and there around the goal line as the season progresses. But that just would require the Jags to score a lot of touchdowns. But I Travis Etienne, you draft him, you're playing him, no problem. James Robinson, him being back or expected to play in some role doesn't scare me at all.
Okay. I mean, especially in these first few weeks, I'm with you. If we see James Robinson get a couple carries and look good, I think it'd be dumb for the Jaguars to not play him around the goal line, to not play him on 3rd and short, that kind of idea. So maybe it does take some hit into ETN's value at some point. But the nice thing is, most of us are playing in half PPR or PPR at this point, and ETN's a pass catcher. So I don't see too much of an issue with his value. I've really come back towards the norm throughout the offseason, but I still think James Robinson's going to have a piece of the offense.
I
But
do want to give you
anyway, good.
before you before you move on to the Commanders, I do want to just say if you have Christian Kirk, this is a plus matchup. And he might be a guy you want, especially if you're in like a full point PPR or half point PPR, you might want to squeeze into your lineup. Like he's going to be their top pass catching option. To think Christian Kirk, the amount of money they paid him, won't leave the game with 10 plus, 12 plus targets against this Commanders team who's missing Chase Young. Like they're not the best in the secondary. They have some pieces, but they're not a full on completed secondary. So I think Christian Kirk is like a sleeper in who you can be in your flex, and definitely a guy you could target in daily fantasy.
I like that. I was actually going to talk about two other tight ends add onto our list. Evan Ingram, Logan Thomas.
Ooh, I love Logan
I know
Thomas,
you.
former
Yeah.
90 overall NCAA 14 quarterback for the Virginia Tech Hokies, which had a delay in their game last week because coaches got stuck in the elevator. So we've now seen it all. But back to the question with the tight ends, Logan Thomas, he's probably last on my list, despite how much I love him, just because he missed so much time with injury in the
Mhm.
preseason. Like, if you want to put him right above Hayden Hurst, feel free. But he's down there. Like, I'm not really looking at him. He's probably on a roster, but I don't trust him week one. And
Yeah.
then Evan Ingram, he's probably like right above Logan Thomas for me. They're still near the bottom. Like I know they gave him like what is it, $10 million for 1 year, but they're overpaying everybody.
Yeah, they
And
were.
maybe if anyone's going to revive him, it could be Doug Peterson. We've seen what he's done with some tight ends, and he could be a security blanket, but that would require him to not drop the ball as well. So my Evan Ingram is, I'll say it this way, like he's a guy you can keep your name on. If he comes away being the target leader, like that might be a waiver ad next week. But for this week or, you know, what I'm expecting, I'm out.
I'm right there with you, but I know it's a guy with a bunch of hype and a guy who has been fantasy relevant in the past. That's why I had to throw their two names out there. Also on the Commander side, like we said, we're probably starting Terry McLaurin. We're starting Antonio Gibson. I think that pretty much wraps up that team.
Well, we got to talk.
Anything else to add? Oh, what?
Um, I do want to add Jahan Dotson,
Okay.
rookie. They drafted in the top. They drafted what 17th overall. Um, I was going to give a shout out to. I was listening to the Fantasy Footballers podcast, another fantasy football podcast, which you've definitely heard of them because they're the number one sports podcast in the world. But they did their bold predictions episode this past week, just like we did. And the one was that Jahan Dotson is going to have more top 15 finishes or the same amount of top 15 finishes as Terry McLaurin. And the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, you know what? That's a bold prediction that I actually think might come true. We've heard all the buzz about Jahan Dotson. So we talked about him. If he's available, like go add him before Sunday as a guy that could be, the number one target. Is still Carson Wentz, so there will be some inconsistency. But not saying put him in your lineup, but I did just want to re-hit on what we talked about on Tuesday. If Jahan Dotson's available, he should be a guy that you're making a last minute add to get ahead of the waivers.
I like it. He's somebody that I actually started adding as a late round flyer in a couple of my late drafts here at the end of the draft season. But now we're on 4 o'clock. So we started off with the New York Giants traveling to the Tennessee Titans. Return of Derrick Henry to the lineup shouldn't be a problem. Robert Woods is somebody you drafted late that I really like in a plus matchup. Do you kind of put him up there with the Christian Kirk, or are you just waiting to see because he was injured and coming off that injury?
If I had to pick between Kirk and Robert Woods, I would probably pick Kirk based on the matchups. It's still a good matchup for Robert Woods, but I think he's a guy that you could throw in your flex that you probably got a little bit later. Maybe he was your flex if you took a quarterback and a tight end early, but he's projected to be the number one guy. I know there's been some rumblings. They have a lot planned for Traylon Burks, but he has to prove it to me before he goes anywhere near my lineup. And the number one option on a team, you'd think you'd feel pretty confident starting week one. So I think Robert Woods is a sneaky name that you could add into your lineup. But outside of him and Derrick Henry, I think the Titans have potential to be a good team this year. I did know I picked them not to make the playoffs after they didn't win their division in our prediction show last week. But I still think they're going to be right there fighting for it, and it's a good team. But those are the only two guys in fantasy I'm looking at for week 1.
And the only guy on the Giants is Saquon Barkley.
Yes, and I will say because he's been like my Jahan Dotson. He's their former first round pick from last year, Kadarius Toney. Same thing. If he's available, Brian Daboll is now the head coach. Used to coach for the Chicago or the Buffalo Bills, not the Chicago Bears. Thank God. He coached for the Buffalo Bills. If Kadarius Toney could come in and be like the Stephon Diggs role, I'm not saying Kadarius Toney is anywhere near as talented or as good as what Stephon Diggs currently is, but that would be where I think he could end up. I know they still have Galladay. Shepard's supposed to still be there. So there's a lot of options, but the guy in New York I like is Toney. So maybe another potential late ad. We're giving you a lot, so you can't pick them up, all of them up, unfortunately. So go with the guys that you like the best, but I wanted to throw him out there.
I like it. I mean, I'm not a fan of Toney, but if anybody on that wide receiver room is going to break out, it's definitely him, and it's definitely not Kenny Galladay. So we can move on then to our next game. It is the Kansas City Chiefs going to the Arizona Cardinals. Solid matchup here. I'll start off with the Cardinals because somebody that we talked about not a ton after the first few weeks in the draft season was Marquise Brown. So I no problem starting him in week 1 or even most of the first 6 weeks without DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. Like, there's just so many injuries to the pass catchers. Like, Hopkins is suspended. Zach Ertz isn't practicing. Rondale Moore is limited in practice on Thursday after practicing on Wednesday. So he tweaked his hamstring in practice or during training on between Wednesday and Thursday. So I think Hollywood Brown and yes, Kyler Murray and him played together at Oklahoma. So it's not like it's a brand new guy. Like there's a reason that Hollywood wanted to go to Arizona. So I think you can play him. I think he's a solid flex option. Um, and then this is going to sound crazy. And I hate that I'm going to say this, but with all the injuries, if you're in a super deep league or you need a really cheap guy in daily fantasy and they're going to have to score points to keep up with the Chiefs,
Let me
AJ
prepare for a
Green.
spit take. I haven't heard that name since last year.
Yeah, because I forgot he was still in the league. So that's where we're at
Pretty
with
much.
AJ Green. But right now, it's going to be him and Hollywood Brown. And if you remember back to last year, AJ Green did have, a couple good games early in the season, when he was fresh, ready to go. So that's what I'm saying. If you're in a deep league, if you're in one of those 2 running back, 3 wide receiver double flex leagues, like you might be struggling to find guys. If 14 team, 16 team, like you might be struggling to find guys if you had some injuries or drafted too early. I'm not saying run out and get there, but if you need a guy in a pinch, or like I said, super cheap in daily fantasy that a lot of people probably won't have, it wouldn't be surprised me if AJ Green, leaves the game with 5 catches and a touchdown. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking, 13 points. Like that's what I'm saying for AJ Green. So not saying he's going to go out there and be a world beater, but potential.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I could definitely see it, and he could end up being in that borderline, relevant guy until DeAndre Hopkins comes back. But once that happens, I don't see there being enough space in that offense for him, or even with Rondale Moore, hopefully coming back and being more relevant after he doesn't tweak his hamstring in practice. Chiefs side, I have 2 quick things to talk about. First, the running backs. Any chance you're starting Clyde Edwards-Helaire? He still seems to be lining up as the starter.
Oh, you probably have to. Like, I mean, this is a guy who was going in round 6 or 7. So unless you took 4 running backs, you're probably considering, and I think you have to roll with it. You're not going to feel great until you see him play because of the emergence of Isaiah Pacheco. They kept Ronald Jones after they thought that they might cut him. They still have Jerick McKinnon for potential pass catching. It's messy, and Andy Reid already doesn't like the running backs. But if you had to pick one, I think it has to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And again, if you look back to early season last year, 3 of his best games came in the first 4 weeks last season. So
It's fair.
he started out strong and then sizzled off at the end. So hopefully he can recapture some of that beginning the season magic that he had last year.
And then wide receivers, they have a bunch. I know the only person that I would think about starting this week is Juju. Any different?
Yeah, you're probably starting him. He is on the injury report, but he's been a full participant with the knee injury. Um, the only other guy, and this would just be a daily fantasy start, not in a like a redraft or anything like that, would be MBS because of the big playability. Um, he might be able, get you a 70-yard touchdown and a couple catches or something like that. So MVS has a potential daily fantasy if you want a part of the Chiefs offense for cheap. But other than that, I think Juju's the only guy realistically. And honestly, you probably have better options too, which is kind of crazy to think that there's a lot better options out there than the top two pass catching options for the Chiefs at the wide receiver position because Travis Kelsey, although he might start to take a step back this year because of his age, is still the guy that's the number one for now.
Yeah, I mean it's very possible, but I think that pretty much wraps up Chiefs Cardinals. So we gotta get moving here. We have four more games here, and I think we're going a little long on time. Las Vegas Raiders are traveling to the Los Angeles Chargers. I think the only person I have a real question of on the Raiders side is Hunter Renfro. Like you're starting Josh Jacobs most likely with where you drafted him. You're definitely starting Devontae Adams, but Hunter Renfro, where are you
Yep, you
at?
can play him.
You're gonna play him? Okay. Even I
I
mean
like
the
Hunter.
Chargers should be a tough defense.
Yeah, but
It's not like it's a
and
positive matchup.
yeah, but I guess if just based on pure output, where do you have him compared to Darren Waller?
I mean, I'm someone who thinks he could pass Darren Waller in output. So yeah, if you're saying it that way, yeah, he should be a starter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he could. I think he has passed Darren Waller as the number two pass catching behind Devontae Adams. Um, and the Chargers are a good defense. It is divisional, but it's also week one. We could see some high scoring. They're both decent offenses, and you can't sleep on the Raiders either. So, and Derek Carr loves Hunter Renfro in the red zone. So I think Hunter Renfro definitely flexible option, if not a wide receiver two option.
Okay. I mean, maybe wide receiver two is a little bit far from me, but hey, however your team was drafted, I think that's a good way to go with it with Hunter Renfro. I think the Chargers are going to be a very straightforward team with who you're playing in fantasy every single week. It's Justin Herbert, it's Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams. Um, Anybody else, or I think that's going to be basically the core four for them most of the year.
Yeah, just keep an eye on Gerald Everett and Donald Parham Jr. to see if any of those two tight ends can join the dartboard as the season progresses. But in terms of who we're starting each week, yep, those are the guys.
All right. I'll let you talk a little bit about your Green Bay Packers then as they travel to the Minnesota Vikings, our last 4 o'clock game.
Awesome. All right, the final 4 o'clock game and the one that 98% of America is going to see on regular TV is the Packers at the Vikings. I'll cover the Packers quick. Their injury report is quite long, and there's a lot of question marks. The big one is Alan Lazard. He hasn't been practicing with. Matt LaFleur said he got stepped on. It was listed as an ankle, so we'll see what that means. Um, Robert Tunyon, he's a tight end that I really like. If he's out there, I think he can be playing. He's been a limited participant coming off the ACL injury, but we'll see if that's more of just preserving him for game day or if he's still not 100% ready to go. Uh, Sammy Watkins is a guy I do like. It's week one. Sammy Watkins always does have, solid games in week
In
one.
week
So I
one
think
specifically, yeah.
I think you can pick him up and play him in your flex if you need a guy for some reason. So I do like Sammy Watkins this week. Um, then the two tackles, Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari, both coming off of knee injuries, have been limited participation. Pretty much haven't done much. So will they play? Will they not play? With a shaky offensive line, it could, limit the amount of touches for like an AJ Dillon. I think that would be a big aspect. I think Aaron Jones with his pass catching ability will be involved every week. But with the injury concerns of the offensive line, I think AJ Dillon could take a little bit of a dip. But that's pretty much the Packers. Like until we know more answers or who's actually going to play, like I said, they probably one of the biggest injury reports. I think it's like 13 people on it heading into week one, which is great. But
It's typical Packers, really.
only thing I can say is if Alan Lazard doesn't go, Sammy Watkins is a really good sneaky pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. He would be the next guy up on that depth chart for me, not the rookies. And we don't even really know if the rookies are going to play for sure, or how much they're going to play. But I can move us on to the Vikings side. Kirk Cousins, not a bad quarterback play if you're someone who punted on quarterbacks. You probably drafted him as that quarterback if you punted. Um, Even though the matchup's not fantastic, he's a guy that's pretty consistent regardless, as long as it's not a primetime game, which it is not. Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen is somebody who I like as that borderline flex. He's actually probably one of my favorite flexes because I think people have been kind of forgetting about it because he didn't have a mind-blowing season like he has in the past, but he's always been a consistent guy. Justin Jefferson, obviously, you drafted him in the first round. He's in. Irv Smith, adding him to that tight end list anywhere near the top.
Yeah, right behind Cole Kmet.
So it's Cole Kmet, Irv Smith, and then the
Yep.
field, kind of.
And you
All
could
right.
put a gap between the field.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have two more games. We'll go to Sunday Night Football. We talked a little bit about this game earlier, the Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. I don't even know where to start here. The Cowboys, Zeke, you probably drafted him to have to play him. I don't love
You
it.
drafted Zeke in the 3rd round. We weren't high on Zeke, so we're not going to love it. But you drafted him to play
Yeah.
him, and you're going to have to do it. CeeDee Lamb, he's in your lineup. I think it's too early. We talked a lot about Jalen Tolbert. I think it's too early to put him in this lineup. We don't expect Michael Gallup. Dalton Schultz, he is a top 5 tight end for me in my rankings. So I definitely like him this week. And I think that's pretty much the Cowboys. It's still too early. There's still better options than Tony Pollard. He's more of a handcuff role. He's not in my opinion, quite there yet. I think you will have some value, but I am very similar to like a Naeem Hines. I think some games will be big, but it won't be used on a consistent basis. Whereas like an AJ Dillon and Kareem Hunt, I think they'll be, a little bit more regularly utilized as number 2 committee options that can be startable in fantasy.
Yeah, I've actually heard way too many people overhyping him on social media this week. They're like, he could run some routes out of the slot. He could be a really good pass catcher. There's so many weapons in Dallas that they're most likely going to use weapons that are actually natural wide receivers as opposed to trying to spotlight a running back playing wide receiver. So I'm not in on him this week, but I do think Tony Pollard could be somebody who is relevant at times throughout the season. And then on the Buccaneers side, it's important to note that Chris Godwin is a full participant in practice. He is actually on track to play this week. You probably got a good value on Chris Godwin. I probably feel confident enough to start him right away. Do you?
Nope,
No. Okay.
I don't.
We're finally
I mean,
torn here.
if so, let's put it this way: if I had to bet on guys coming off injuries, so if I'm looking there, J.K. Dobbins, if he goes versus Chris Godwin, I'd go Chris Godwin. If it's between in my flex spot, Miles Sanders and Chris Godwin, I'd go Chris Godwin. So there is opportunities where I would play Chris Godwin, but because of the value, I would like to wait and see. He tore his ACL late last season. He is making incredible time, which is great. But he's also a guy that uses his explosiveness. He's middle of the field kind of guy. He does have the big playability. And I just kind of have to see it to believe it. And then also, um, with all the injuries that the Buccaneers have had along their offensive line, I am actually a little bit worried for the Buccaneers and more importantly, Tom Brady with the pass rush of Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, the guys they have in the middle that can actually go out there and cause some havoc. That this might not be the best game for Tom Brady. He did miss 11 games. So I'm actually fading the Tampa Bay Buccaneers players just a little bit until I can see that offensive line hold up.
Interesting. Okay. And then when you say faded, you're not meaning like you're benching Mike Evans. You're
Absolutely
not.
not.
No. It's like just temper expectations a little bit, but you got to play those guys that you drafted in those spots, especially in
Right.
week one.
I don't love you're still gonna play Leonard Fournette because of where you drafted him. I don't love it. Chris Godwin, I'd prefer to take the wait and see approach. There's no tight ends I would add to our list here, whether that be Kyle Rudolph or Kate Otten or Cameron Brate. Like there's just too many other names. Russell Gage, he hasn't been there all preseason, so I'm not forcing him into the lineup. There's just a lot of uncertainty around the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that
Mhm.
as much as I can, I'd like to see, what this team is going to look like, what it might be. Will they struggle in week one? Um, Tom Brady, he's another guy. You draft him late in the draft, so you picked him to play. But it is a good matchup against the Cowboys with their and how they like to get turnovers, but they do give up big plays too. So um, I would say, he's right on the teeter if you have a Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, Jameson Winston or Jameis Winston, not Jameson, that are like still available out there. Like I'd be okay with popping out Tom Brady just because of, um, maybe I'm a little bit too, you know, talking him down because we know Tom Brady prime time week one he'll probably come out and ball out because that's just what he does. But if there was going to be a start of a downfall for Tom Brady, you'd have to think it would be against a good team with a poor offensive line, turning 45, missing 11 days in training camp. So there's just a lot of uncertainty around the Buccaneers for me.
Okay, I like it. I mean, it's very good advice, and we'll have to see how that breaks out. And if he has a good week one, then maybe we're not worried about Tom Brady the rest of the year. If he has a bad week one, maybe we ought to keep an eye on those Buccaneers. But we can move on. Monday Night Football, last game of the week, and it's Russell Wilson returning to the Seattle Seahawks. It's Denver Broncos, Seattle Seahawks. I'll start with the Seahawks because it should be pretty quick. You're starting DK Metcalf. I'm not touching Tyler Lockett until I see something. I'm really not touching a lot of players on that team. But somebody who I think is a good start just this week, because Kenneth Walker may not play, or even if he does play, could be limited, is Rashad Penny. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think as long as Kenneth Walker is not playing, then you can play Rashad Penny. The downside is this is the Monday night game, and we might not know that answer until uh, Monday night or Monday morning if Kenneth Walker will play. Maybe he'll get ruled out earlier. But just like on Thursday, we talk about getting your Thursday night players out of your flex spot. Make sure your Monday night players are in your flex. So if you're gonna flex Rashad Penny and he's not available, and you can throw in someone else that might be playing on the Broncos or the Seattle Seahawks, you can do that.
So one of those guys that could be somebody has sneaky value. I know you mentioned him last week. Is KJ Hamler. I think he's probably the guy that's most available that has the best chance to have a good game on Monday night. If you are somebody that's rolling the dice with Penny and then it doesn't work out, is there anybody else you can think of, or is it just Hamler?
I think so. I think Hamler is like a guy that you would add, and I don't know if I'd feel confident throwing him right in my lineup. But if you had to pick someone up, that would probably be the guy. But if you have Rashad Penny and let's say, ooh, man, there's not a lot of great options to throw into your flex, but maybe you were debating Rashad Penny and Melvin Gordon. Like that's an easy swap to Melvin Gordon. You probably were going to play
Yeah,
him anyways.
yeah.
Um, but that
You
was
probably
one.
drafted Jerry Jeudy high enough that he's a wide receiver too.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy and Cortland Sutton, they're both drafted high enough. Um,
Yeah.
the title you don't please tell me you don't have Rashad Penny and Tyler Lockett on your team because you're in for a
I
sad.
still might roll Rashad Penny.
But if you found out Kenneth Walker is playing,
I still might roll Rashad Penny.
all right. Yeah, so I think KJ Hamler, he'd be the big upside guy that you could, potentially come in and get a deep touchdown or something like that. So I probably would agree
Yeah.
KJ Hamler is the guy, and there's probably not anyone else, but at least he's out there and he's an option. So if you have some of those guys, but I might even still roll Rashad Penny with a limited Kenneth Walker too, just because what we saw with last season with him. So
Mhm.
I guess it depends. Do you need 10 points to win or do you need 20 points to win? If you need 20 points, go with the high flyer and KJ Hamler.
I think that is a good way to wrap that up. And we will keep you updated on our social media channels with some of those injury updates, like that Monday night one, because obviously we're going to know more on Sunday morning than we know now when Monday night football injury reports are very, very not specific on a Thursday.
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, be sure to be checking out our Twitter. Uh, we might be doing some other stuff throughout the season to help you guys with injury updates and all that information. So make sure you're checking out all our social media channels. You're logged into our website. You're joining us on Discord because this podcast is more fun for you and more fun for us when you get involved. And as always, Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Cody. And yes, it is more fun for us and more fun for you when you get involved. Thank you all one more time for listening into the Couch GMs podcast. For Cody Roadcap, I'm George Kerth, and we'll see you all next week. Enjoy your week 1.